I think way too often, and I think this again is probably a good advice to my younger self. I think way too often you get captivated by things like money and status, and you run faster, and you get blinded by some of these things, rather than actually understanding that the most privileged thing you can have in life is balance.
Welcome to another edition of ContraMinds. In this episode, I am in conversation with Thomas Kolster. Thomas is the founder and creative director of Goodvertising agency, one of the pioneers in turning environmental, societal, and health risks into market opportunities for brands, where growing the bottom line goes hand in hand with creating better communities and a better planet. He's advised numerous Fortune 500 companies, startups, government agencies, and NGOs. Thomas is also the author of 2 books, Goodvertising and most recently, The Hero Trap. We discuss key moments and ideas from his life and work over the course of our discussion. So without much further ado, here is my conversation with Thomas Kolster. I really wanted to start off, Thomas, with when I look back at your career, you started off with advertising way back in the 90s. And how did you discover the world of advertising and marketing, and how did you get in there?
I think everybody kind of got their own little path into advertising, and mine was so much of a coincidence, in fact, because I was studying at university, and I think I studied humanities at the time, international humanities, and I was one of the kids that, I got easily bored. I thought university was way too easy, and it wasn't really challenging. And so at the time, I dated this girl whose mother worked as a copywriter. I knew nothing about the world of advertising, and I loved writing. And so I was bored of university, and she was like, "Why don't you try and kind of go into advertising?" And I didn't really know anything about it. And then I picked up this book, Ogilvy on advertising. And I still to this day remember that there was this one page in the book, and Ogilvy was like, it was outside his like castle in UK somewhere. And I think the little, the little copy underneath the picture said something like, "Yes, and if you're in doubt, that's my helicopter." And and, and and then I was like, why the heck am I studying international humanities where I can write for advertising and get a helicopter? And and that was my early beginning, a hunt for the ability to write, and maybe a bit of greed in there as well.
One of the things that I read about your story really is the fact that somewhere in 2004, you had an awakening of sorts, saying, "What shit are we doing selling brands to consumers?" And that was a moment where I think you went back to reflecting the work that you've been doing, and there was a big shift in the direction that you took. So, what really happened, and what is the belief that drove you to this change?
Yeah, I think it's almost like you, as we have as creatives. I think you get light bulb moments, or you get sometimes a door that opens or something in your life, and my thing was, it's probably like 10 years into my career. I was working, or actually, I was heading up my own medium-sized agency at the time, and we are hosting the climate summit in Copenhagen. I'm sure that all of you are listening know what the climate summit is about. All these elected government leaders at the time. We had Barack Obama, Tony Blair, Angela Merkel, so all the big guns came to Copenhagen. And I had, obviously, since we were hosting, you always have this sort of national pride going on. Like now with the Japanese and the Olympics, people are proud about global events like these. So I really had a high expectation of our elected government leaders standing up to the what is today definitely a climate emergency, and obviously we know nothing, nothing came out of it. Absolutely nothing really came out of that. And so for me, it was sort of an epiphany. There's two things that kind of did it. I mean, one thing was just the inaction of our elected government leaders, The second thing was, it was the first time I saw brands around the city of Copenhagen advertise things that they didn't usually talk about. Fiat suddenly talking about them transporting their cars by train to Copenhagen, all these sort of weird statements that I never heard before. And so I thought to myself, what can I do in my professional capacity to do something about this? And then, if you think about it, I mean, Coca-Cola touched 1.5 billion people on a daily basis. What if a brand like Coca-Cola did something about it? What if a lot of these brands that we were working for did something? So I think I was in this sort of weird value, internal value war within my own mind, where it's like, wait, I came into the industry because I love creativity, a bit of the greed, and suddenly I didn't really feel value aligned, because I was like, why am I selling cars in cities that are way too congested? I mean, you can't squeeze more cars into Mumbai or anything like that, or not even in Copenhagen. I'm selling cheeseburgers to people who are way too fat already. Some things ought to happen, and the brand side of that was obviously, you know, the perception of brands at the time was changing. So I wrote this book called Goodvertising, which was basically just a rallying cry for me as a creative to the industry and say, we ought to change our tracks. We ought to understand that if we are to preserve and make the brands prosper that we work for today, we really need to deal with some of these things, because different from, I mean, my parents' generation, they saw brands as as those that brought prosperity and wealth to the middle class and in general in society. Whereas young people growing up today, most of them look at brands as somebody who is to blame for social inequality, ecological degradation. So there's a really like a immediate change of mindset. So that was my that was my shift and my early mission. And remember, back then I was 30. I was still I was still a young creative at the time. And sometimes when looking back at that piece of work, it's crazy that somehow it's still extremely relevant. But I also feel that there's a sort of a kind of strong value-driven aspect to the book that comes from that anger you can sometimes have when you're 30. Yeah.
No,
So
but that's an interesting take, Thomas, because when you really talk about advertising and brands are seen as aspirational uh, assets and aspirational value for by consumers. Your thought of saying, "Hey, how do I build value and sustainability proposition in brands?" is a very different thought. And how did you go about then building your business? Because even today you have the Nestle's of the world, the Pepsis of the world having these issues, and clearly there is a momentum towards, I would call, wellness, better nutrition, organic farming thinking, ecology being protected. There's a whole movement which is there, but there is a big contradiction between the intention and the action, right? Because I still buy Pepsi, I still buy Coke, I still buy Nestle, but clearly a percentage of that revenue that they make, if it goes back to social causes, doesn't mean that sustainability is maintained, right? So therefore, is the problem of sustainability in brands a storytelling problem, or is it a good to have, yet I will do something for business problem? How do you see it?
yeah, I think what kind of back then at least happened was that I feel that this sort of brand Fata Morgana that was very aspirational suddenly kind of changed the notion from only being the tip of the story, and suddenly everything underneath, like if you compare it to an iceberg, everything underneath water level were all these big concerns that suddenly came out in the open. I mean, what are some of the ingredients in the burger that you eat daily? How are those workers treated? wait a moment, you're a fossil fuel polluting company. And the early days, again, 10, 12 years ago, was not a lot of companies understood this. And in the book, it was difficult to find good examples. I mean, at the time, it was like Anita Roddick from Body Shop. You had, early days of Ben and Jerry's. Unilever just launched their sustainable living plan back then. Um, so examples were far between. I think what's sort of happening right now is, a new reckoning in a way that it's not niche anymore. I mean, when the book came out, and I remember this, that it was definitely not a conversation we had in the world of advertising or marketing. It just wasn't. I mean, it wasn't there in Cannes. It wasn't in any of the shows. I mean, in the beginning, I didn't really get invited into the world of marketing, but the people who absolutely loved me were the people who'd been working with sustainability for quite some time, because they were like, hey, wait a moment, this guy got a different perspective on how we can solve some of these things. And and today, I think the key challenge is in fact that, and obviously this really differs from where we view the world. I mean, obviously, I'm calling in from Copenhagen, Denmark today. Scandinavia is, extremely fixated on sustainability. It's a hygiene factor. It's if that's just what you need to live up to. And every retailer here talks about limiting food waste or having more organic produce. I mean, I think we still hold the world record of most organic products of any country when you go into a retail space. So that has changed, and that pressure, I think, is a really key challenge towards brands. And especially if we look at the big brands, I think a lot of the big brands are losing market shares to challenger brands that get this new mindset, that get the young consumers, that know that, in fact, a lot of those products they've been pushing for years are really not living up to the standard of what people are expecting today. And I think that's a key challenge for a lot of these big FMCG brands. One of the guys I interviewed for my latest book, and we can come back to that, but was Mark Pritchett, the global CMO of Procter and Gamble, and he shared something interesting, because he said, P&G has been in the business for 180 years. We got some of the best scientists, research, and developers employed, and yet people don't trust us. They tend to trust an 18-year-old guy who makes soap out of his mom's basement. So it really does show this tremendous power shift and this challenge that I think should scare everyone working in advertising and be a wake up moment for all of us to take these things seriously.
So clearly, while the global call for sustainability is huge, the brands trying to shift into this momentum is a big problem, right? Because a large part of the revenue comes from these, monolith brands, right? And therefore, the challenge of them trying to shift gears into a thinking like this is a real issue, right? So therefore, how do you see this challenge being addressed by these large brands? Because clearly, if I was Head and Shoulders, if I was Gillette, if I was Coke, if I was Domino's, these are monolith brands with billions of dollars in market cap. It's almost like Ronaldo, moving away his Coke can, and clearly, there was a market capitalization drop for the brand. So clearly, there is a momentum that's actually there with consumers. But the real challenge is, how do you see these brands moving out of this challenge? Because at the end of the day, huge revenues seem to be coming from these monolith brands, and there's a certain amount of quality, trust, believability that these brands bring in because of centuries of value that advertising created. So how do you see this shift happening?
I mean, it's incredible to see the marketing and brand investments that have gone into into some of these brand properties. And I mean, I think we witnessed it, with Gillette, with Pampers, with a lot of these household names that suddenly the growth that we've seen from a lot of these brands aren't delivering, um, and it really does show this shift is bigger, and more important than just the sustainability issues. And for me, I think it also comes down to the sort of leadership or the way that you manage these brands. And so for me, having been such a big advocate for purpose and sustainability with my first book, Goodvertising, I had 3 years ago a sort of second wake up moment, in the sense that I think it got provoked by a couple of things, but I think the key thing that provoked me was, in fact, how difficult it was to create change in my own life and across the business. And I think it's something that most of us probably can recognize from our yearly New Year's pledges or whatever we try and promise ourselves. I'm going to be a better boyfriend or husband next year, and I'm going to lose weight or whatever it might be. And so I started thinking about that quite a bit, because ultimately this is about creating change, organizational change, societal change. That's what this movement was about. And the second thing was, again and again, I observed these big brands standing up for equality, um, climate change, uh, and yet they failed. They got criticized. I mean, look at Volkswagen, right? I mean, Volkswagen was one of the car companies that I had as a case in my first book, Goodvertising. And yes, we all know about Dieselgate today. We all know about the failures in leadership. Even some of their management have gone to jail. If we take Chipotle, they've been on an up and down, at like a yo-yo type thing. Another case from my first book. So I realized a lot of these brands did this wrong, because they pitched themselves as the heroes and said, "Believe in us. We're going to take care of this. We're going to fix everything for you. Just lean back. Trust us. We are big brands. We can do this." And yet they failed. And so in my latest book, The Hero Trap, I really said, beware of this. We need a new type of leadership if we want to deal with this really precocious situation right now. And it's really about fundamentally looking at a different way of shaping brands, uh, that looks at not the brand as the agent of change, but actually respects you and I, because I think that's the key challenge for these big brands, that they don't connect with us on a human level. They don't understand our aspirations and deliver on those. Um, so the key question I'm asking in the book, and ask leaders and brands to ask themselves, is not going on the value-driven Simon Sinek why crusade and ask, why am I in the world? Why, sitting on the bench and being philosophical about it. But instead, ask a different question, which is, who can you help people become? How can you actually help you and I with some of the challenges that we face in our daily lives? Whether those are, you mentioned the challenge of healthy eating habits, of nutritious food, uh, or maybe it's about feeling safe in the community. There's so many things that really does matter, and I think that's a shift that needs to happen. Is, in fact, that brands need to avoid pitching themselves as the heroes, but really try to understand how they can help people become heroes in their own lives.
So tell me, Thomas, it's a very interesting perspective, and you're really talking about, me is the new mass.
Yeah,
You're talking about unmass marketing,
yeah,
right? So these are the concepts that you talk about, and let's take the example of a brand like Nike. Uh, I think the fact that me as a consumer want to be more fit, therefore I buy my running shoes, I buy my sneakers, I want to use them. But what you're really telling me is, how do I change Swami the person, and how does Nike build the change, right? At one end it's the leadership in the company, at the other end it's the various sustainability production processes that you run. uh, Finally it's about me buying the brand and ensuring that I live a better, healthy life. If I were to take these three different tracks, how will your branding strategy need to undergo a shift, and how would you approach it from the framework that you talk about?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think the one of the key challenges is that it's a much more holistic challenge than we sometimes have been used to dealing with in marketing. In fact, because we've been incredibly brand focused and haven't dealt with the whole company, and really kind of trying to understand that. And I think today you have to, you really have to. And for me, the first step is, as I mentioned, really to look at the sort of leadership and how you build a meaningful brand. And for me, one of the things I mentioned, the who question, which is part of a process I call the arrow, which was basically developed by psychotherapy and coaching, really trying to understand. We know that there's this intention action gap between people saying they want to buy from purposeful companies, but very few people follow through. There's a global survey from Sustainable Brands that looks at this, and they put 65% of people globally want to buy from a purposeful brand, but only 26% follow through. So there's a gap of 39%. What I wanted to do with this sort of arrow methodology was, in fact, to create brands that supported my personal journey, that pushed me to action. So it's not creating a brand that's a preacher, but that's a coach helping us. And so that's the first step. And I call these brands not purposeful brands, because I think they're they're too self-important, too self-glorifying. They're the sort of like Mother Teresa's and Gandhi's, and how many Gandhis can there exist in this world? I wish there were more, but if you look at the supermarket shelves, there's just way too many that are pitching themselves as Gandhi. And so it's not a believable positioning. Um, so that's sort of the first step. The second step is obviously to understand how you can shift your organization, how you can, how from a sustainability perspective, you can either limit the negative impact you have, or maybe a lot of the dialogues today go around actually being net positive, so developing a positive outcome or even a regenerative outcome. And a regenerative outcome is, in fact, that you actually clean up all the mess that you've done already. So if you take, for example, a big company as Microsoft, they came out not too long ago and said in 2050, they're actually going to succeed to offset all the damage that they've done in terms of carbon through all the years in business. So it's a sort of new mindset that's picking up in business. So that's the second thing. The third thing is obviously how do you unmask yourself? How do you deal with these young people that grew up in a world that's fundamentally different from what you and I grew up in? I mean, when I went to ad school, I had a course in print advertising, TVCs, radio, outdoor. That those were the media. Honestly, and it makes me sound really old, but today, obviously, young people grow up in a world where they can create anything by the push of the button, and that's how they feel it. And I remember this. I remember I did this talk at a university, and I had four big brands in the room. And typically, if you're at a business school, all the business students, they want to go and work for these big corporates, and all those four corporates had a burning purpose, and so they did this presentation. I did my presentation about my latest book, and then in the end, I just asked the students in the room. I think there was 400 students, and I said, "How many of you want to go and work for four of those well-renowned, purposeful companies?" And only 20 to 30 people raised their hands. And I was absolutely shocked because it was the lowest number I've ever seen. This is 2 years ago. Because of the pandemic, I haven't been doing too much of lecturing at universities. But an incredibly shocker, even from an employment and recruiting point of view, that if only 10% of students in a business school want to go and work for these corporates, it's a gargantuan challenge. And I asked them, so what is it that you guys want to do? The ones who didn't raise your hand. I mean, what's your thing? Tell me. And they were like, yeah, but I'm thinking about kind of creating this own little business where, and others were like, yeah, I don't want to work for these big, and you call them monolith brands. Rather want to go and work for a startup. So their mentality is completely different. So I think that mindset is in fact incredibly important when we look at how do we create and activate these transformative brands. And that made me create a second tool which I call the wheel. So it's like a steering wheel, and the further out you go, the more control you give to you and I, because typically it was a company would launch everything, they would do everything, they would say where to distribute it, they would determine the price, the taste, all that stuff based on market research, which is an incredibly heavy and time consuming process. Today it almost feel like before that process is ended, that thing is not a trend anymore. People buckthorn is definitely not the thing you want to put in ice cream anymore. It's too late. The train has moved on. And so for me, it's really kind of moving from a we do everything mindset to actually understanding how can you enable you and I, which I think is really what's needed. And also in terms of when we sometimes say, why are people not engaging with our marketing? Because you're not engaging with them, because if you want to engage somebody, you don't want to be the boss that come and says, here, do this, or I've done everything, but really saying, here we have this challenge, help us out. We know you're passionate about X, Y, Z. Come on, let's do this together. And let me give you one good campaign example, and we talk about things like products and services and pricing. But one of the campaigns we looked into was II. It's a cooperative out of the US. It's kind of like they sell outdoor clothing like Patagonia and other brands like that. So it speaks to people who are passionate about the outdoors. And on Black Friday, this humongous commercial endeavor, they said, we're going to close our stores and we're going to encourage everyone in the US to opt outside. Go outside, enjoy nature, which really talks to this, who can you help people become mindset. I mean, I'm the kind of crazy guy that if I come to Mumbai, if I go to New York, I always try to find a park, a little kind of green space where I can just like zoom out a little bit from all the hustle and bustle of the city. And so they really tapped into that. But the interesting thing was they made people part of this campaign. So it wasn't like they were campaigning people. They were saying like, opt outside, share your moments, be part of this movement. And in just 4 years, it grew from 1.2 million people who participated to 15 million people. So it really does show what happens when you open up for people's passion, creativity, and turn them into a powerful resource in the marketing mix. And I think that's the shift we're seeing. So those are kind of the three fundamental steps. Get your leadership in order, not by your navel gazing Simon Sinek why, but by asking who can you help people become. Secondly, take a wholehearted look at your company to understand the challenges, the opportunities from the broad spectrum of social challenges, environmental challenges, governance challenges. And thirdly, how do you really open up for people's passions and creativities and make it a fun brand to engage with? Because why should I engage with a brand that doesn't behave like the brands that I'm usually engaging with? I mean, think about it, is the Instagram generation. They're sitting there, they're talking with their peers. Maybe it's one of the peers who created this new fashionable clothing brand. If they're not happy about the cap or the food that they're producing, they'll write them, they'll tell them, and maybe they'll launch a new taste. That's the sort of mentality that big brands need to get to be relevant. And it's really about speed. It's really about openness. It's really about being human. And it's most of all really about understanding what it is that drives people, motivates people, and try and support them on that journey.
It's interesting that you say this, and I read one terminology that you used. You said give marketing mix in the hands of the consumer. That's really what you were talking
Yeah.
about. So literally a brand manager has a marketing mix element, and then he says, let me now control all the marketing mix elements. And you are talking about saying, you know what, empower the people with the marketing mix and let them be engaged in this process. Can you tell me some examples of places or brands where you believe this methodology could have been applied, and you saw this as you saw them do their campaigns, or as they did their marketing, you said, hey, imagine if this marketing mix was empowered in the hands of the consumer, this brand could have actually had a 10x impact. And can you give me some examples of where they missed a trick or two there?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of examples of brands who by applying this kind of complete disrupt the way that we usually look at these things. And I mean, let me give you a good example, and it's interesting because I actually already wrote about it in my first book, Goodvertising, but I never really saw it from that perspective at the time. But I thought it was an interesting thing. And at one point, BMW created this program where they would um, they would have these new. They launched the BMW i3, which was their first iteration of an electric vehicle, and they started putting those in big cities like Hamburg and Berlin. But the crazy thing was you could go over there and you can open the car with your phone and you can drive it around and you can leave it wherever you want it. So this is an example of where you open up your distribution for me to decide. Because think about the Avis model, the Hertz model, the classical car rental companies, how dumb that model is. I have to go to the Avis office to pick up my car, to wait in line for quite some time, to deal with whatever is in that thing. I drive around with the car. I have to put fuel on it. I have to drive back, leave it there, go back to where I live. So it's not on my terms. It's on Avis's terms because they have their office there. What do I care? So that's really an example of a platform, and it's. I mean, if I just look here in and they're expanding across the world, that's extremely successful. I mean, I don't have a car in Copenhagen mostly because I bicycle or I walk, but when I want to use a car, that's the car I use because they're readily available wherever I'm at. So that's a really good example of a brand that does distribution differently. Uh, I can give you a pricing example, in fact, which is from sometimes obviously you need to do what you preach yourself. But obviously on the back of the pandemic, I was always in an airplane, always touring around the world and doing keynotes and workshops, and suddenly that stopped in the month of March. And I was like, how can I get the message out there? And obviously, like everybody else, we started doing webinars, and we had these discount codes and stuff like that. And then I realized that, why am I charging a fixed price for a webinar when I encourage readers of my book to open up the pricing strategy? So what we did was, in fact, we said, you determine the price. And then we explained people, at €0, we're going to go bankrupt at some point. It's not a viable business model for us. At €29, we break even. At 39, we're starting to make a profit. And at 49 or 59, this is becoming, a fairly good business for us. And the interesting thing was when we shifted the model, we earned more money. And even from the people who in the beginning, when they signed up for the webinar, decided to pay zero, we did a follow-up email and converted 10 to 15% of those to buy something, whether that was an audiobook or a book or sign up for our next webinar. So it really kind of does show this exciting shift. And I mean, you mentioned Nike before, and I think they ought to get recognition for it. I know they have had that, but but for the Nike ID program. If you think about how forward thinking that was, obviously it was, in the back of this whole co-creation thing that was going on at the time, but really how great they were at understanding that these young consumers don't want to just sit around and get a pair of sneakers like it is. No, they want to have a say. They want to design it. They want to have fun with it. And even today, if you go to the Nike store in Soho in New York, it doesn't feel like a retail space. It's more like a creative space where you can meet some of the legends that you look up to. You can meet some of the exciting creators of street art that can help you kind of customize some of the gear that you bought, etc. It's a playground for people who want to express themselves, who's part of street culture. And I think that's also the fundamental shift that needs to happen when we look at what's happening in retail, because retail right now is failing.
Great. I also read a very interesting point in the book, which is really this whole, a young consumer who was absolutely, angry that mobile phones were, being changed so frequently, and he came up with this idea of replacing the parts that he did not like, almost like a Lego brick.
Yeah.
And therefore there is a product design idea in the marketing idea, right? So therefore it's not just about the marketing campaign, but it's also the product design that you need to look at. And therefore I think there are some great ideas that, can you explain that, what you wrote about there? And I thought it was a great example of picking up the Lego bricks idea and applying it back into the mobile phone.
I think that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this new book, The Hero Trap, was to talk with the big guys, the big brands like P&G, IKEA, etc. But I also wanted to talk with the smaller guys, those that were challenging the business as usual, those that were understanding this sort of transformative mindset, and that understood that it's really important to put people first and on mass marketing. And so Dave Harkins was this young Dutch design student, and as you said, he was just tired that you had to throw out a mobile phone if the battery wasn't working, or the screen broke, or the camera wasn't working. And so he created this thing where he said, "Why don't we design a phone where you can put all these things together? You can customize your phone like it's phone blocks." And the project was called Phone Blocks. And the idea was also to say, why do we have Apple producing the camera? Why don't we get the world's best camera producer to do that little block, and we can adapt that? And so what he did was, this was an idea. I mean, he was 25 at the time. I met him at a couple of times. I even had him talk at a conference in Copenhagen. I love the guy. So what he did was, he put this video up. It was basically just an idea. Got 20 million views in a very short amount of time, and caught the attention of lots of big businesses out there. And Motorola was one of the brands that picked him up and did trials, and they played around with the concept. And so that's just one example, I think, of this power of enabling people, and everybody wanted to kind of take part. Everybody wanted to help the guy. But I can also share another example, which I think is quite interesting. So this was a young Swedish woman called Marie Delacroix, and I came across her a number of years back, and she's probably the best example of like a millennial or something. So she really had a passion for purpose and sustainability and stuff. So she wanted to go and work for Starbucks because she believed in what Howard Schultz was saying. Let's fix every community one cup of coffee at a time, or whatever their purpose is. And so she believed in that. She didn't get the job because her hair was green, so apparently that didn't really fall into the guidelines. But anyways, we should be happy about that, because then she decided to create her own business, and really a business on her and on everybody's terms. And it was called Wheelies. And the whole idea was that, why should Starbucks dictate everything? Why should they dictate how things should be done. So she created a micro franchise, and it was basically bicycles that you could buy that was equipped with coffee machines, etc. So you could start your own little coffee shop, and you can drive around in cities. And it was really, for people themselves to do their businesses. Obviously, I mean, in some instances it's a bit of a joke, right? Because that's in most countries. I mean, if you look at India, that's how business is. you know that's how you start a business. But obviously, if you're in the world of big franchises like Starbucks, that's definitely not the way, right? If you want to start a Starbucks franchise, it's $500,000. But it was really like a really successful scalable business, and they, I think, in 4 years managed to be in 70 countries, and I think that took Starbucks probably 15 years. So yet another example of a brand that understood that you need to do business on people's terms and open up for their creativity and inspiration. It was so interesting because I spoke with some of their, they call them wheelers, some of their macro franchises, and the ones I spoke with in Copenhagen, they were passionate about coffee. I mean, they loved, grinding the coffee, tasting the beans, all that stuff. The real kind of coffee lovers. And then I spoke with a wheeler in Lebanon, in Beirut, and the only thing he wanted to do was he wanted to work really long hours to provide for his family, because most of the time when he had to go and work for a regular coffee chain, he could only get 8 to 10 hours, and he wanted to push. He wanted to make the best he could do for his family. So he really just wanted to work hard, and that's why he loved this concept and had saved up for buying one of those bicycles. So I think that's, for me, is really two quite inspiring cases of what's happening with some of these challenger brands and how fast they're moving.
Great, fantastic examples, Thomas. So one of the learnings that I'm having out of this conversation is, so if you are in marketing, the traditional method of building a marketing strategy, looking at working with an advertising agency, is really how the last 100 years went by, right? So if you look at the next 100 years, you need to embed probably a product design thinking in marketing. You need to have a technology thinking in how you build the brand, because imagine, you have mobile apps today which actually keep nudging you, saying, hey, you have not done your fitness regimen today, therefore, which means that if I'm really buying a brand for the me in the goal that I really want to achieve, and the brand then therefore needs to actually envelop service around the product, right? And when you really want to envelop service around the product, you really have to rethink the configuration of how a brand is really being built. So how do you really therefore redesign the marketing departments of the future?
I think it's a really good question, and I think, a lot of this comes back to one of the primary questions I asked myself when writing this book, and it was, in fact, what leader, organization, or brand have really created change in my life. And I'll encourage your listeners to think about that question as well. I mean, what brand, leader, organization have really created change, positive change in your life? And my list was disappointingly short, and especially when we talk about a world that's now full of all these brands that talk about purpose and societal change, then it's shocking that I can't mention that many. And so I think where we're heading really kind of takes a much more open approach. It's really about understanding how you can reach out, how you can be in a conversation with people, how it's about reciprocity. And for me, that's probably the key thing. It's that it comes down to actually respecting people and where they're heading, and trying to understand that how you can help them on that journey. I think that's what the marketing departments of the future needs to understand. It is really that it's about unmarketing everything. It's about opening up things. It's about opening up the brands for people to play with, have fun with. Um, and when you do that, it's really quite an exciting opportunity, because if we think about how the market is shifting overall, the problem is in fact that people aren't buying status or all these things that they used to be buying. I know there's still a lot of aspirational consumption in a lot of markets, but again, if we talk about this from sort of like a Northern European, Western kind of perspective, um, I definitely see a shift, because the thing is, when everybody can buy anything, there's not a lot of status in flashing yet another, cap with a Gucci logo on it. And the only thing that actually is high status because you can't buy it is effort, it's time, it's self-development, it's all these things. And if you look at the world's used to be one of the world's richest guys, Mark Zuckerberg, he used to have these yearly challenges, right, where he wanted to learn how to speak Chinese, learn how to code AI, because you can't buy that for money. And I'm really seeing this across the board, from changing consumption overall. It's not about just bigger, better products, but it's really about a better me. And you see this shift in, for example, the travel industry, their percent of like experience economy, etc. But it used to be just cool to go in and you check in at a Hilton or like a Four Seasons, and that would be the thing. You'd share that on Instagram. But today, what's much more high status is in fact to go to like an Italian mama and learn how to make ravioli, or you go and you challenge yourself and you go diving in the Maldives or whatever it might be. So I think that's a really, really important point of this as well, is how that is changing and how that consumption is changing. And I think brands, quite frankly, need to adapt to that as well. So it's really not just about change the marketing departments, but it's really kind of creating this shift towards where we're entering. And as you said, I mean, all these tech-enabled gadgets that's popping up everywhere, a lot of those are in fact transformative brands by essence, because they want to help us, and they're really successful at scaling incredibly fast. Even I mean, take the company Blinkist. I think they started in Germany. Basically, the insight is just that a lot of us don't have the time to read books, unfortunately. So, but we want to still seem smart, intelligent, part of the conversation. So what they've done is that they've taken famous business books and they've done a 15-minute summary, an audio summary. Everybody have time for those 15 minutes. So you can get Tipping Point, you can get all of these books in 15 minutes. And it's really about understanding who can help people become again. I want to be seen as a smart, savvy business guy who are up to date with the latest reading. And they're just incredibly good at delivering that. So for me, in the book, I talk about, it's almost like a blue ocean strategy, but understanding how can you unlock meaningful roles in people's lives. And I call it who voids. And a really good example is a company I spoke to that's called Respect Your Universe. And it's a sports retailer like a Nike or an Adidas. But if you think about it, most of the time when you go into a sports retailer, the challenge is in fact that you meet this guy and he's like a tennis pro, and I already feel like a little bit intimidated when I go into the store, because I feel like, I'm left hand, right hand, I don't have the catcher, all this stuff, all the racket, And so what they realized was that, isn't it interesting that there's no sports retailer out there for the average guy, for the couch potato, for those who might just want to go for a walk, for those who might want to play tennis, but they're never really aspiring to become a pro. It's a thing they do every second month because they go to this little thing with their friends. So basically the insight is there that no matter what your goals are in life or in sport, we're here for you. We respect your universe. And even in the way that they recruit, it's the same thing. You don't go in there and you find you're the usual sort of fit, like muscular type guy. You can go in there and you can find the couch potato behind the behind the counter that understands you. And I think this is a really clever way as a brand to find a sort of blue ocean in the meaningful role one can play. So so there's a lot of shifts happening, which for me is incredibly exciting. There's never been a more exciting time to work in marketing. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree, and I really love the word that you use, which is called unmarketing, because to me that's really the key. Because there is too much of marketing that's happening to me. There must be more and more unmarketing to me,
Yeah.
right? That's really what I think is very very critical. How do you think leadership should drive this thinking in brands? Because it's a mindset shift, right? Because you're almost like this hero who thinks I've found the best positioning, I found the best campaign, I'm doing the most innovative distribution strategy. It's almost like I'm the superman of marketing,
Yeah.
right? Therefore I come up with all these big ideas. Therefore, how do you drive this change in leadership style for this kind of marketing?
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's not an easy shift. It's really not an easy shift because it's really going up against a lot of the things we've learned in marketing over the last many years. But at the same time, what I love about it is that it's actually incredibly human. It's really about lives. It's about understanding human insights, motivation. I think that's always been the key to powerful marketing. I mean, if you go back to Bill Bernbach, he always talked about how, you know, how an insight into people's minds and behaviors are really what drives and builds long-lasting, meaningful, strong brands. But I think the shift, and I think this is where I spend most of my time these days, is in fact that I I try to shift these. I try to shift the thinking. I try to in the book give people some tools that they can apply in their daily work in marketing to kind of adapt some of these models. Um, because I mean, just if you look at uh, just if you look at how many organizations that still have, really difficulties in understanding the sustainability challenges. I mean, I spent 10 years touring, doing workshops, trying to get that front and center. And I think the same thing is happening right now with these things we talk about right now. Um, I mean, I absolutely love opening up, being faster in market, being playful, and we even see the big guys doing this. I mean, if you look at IKEA, for example, one of the things they've done is that they've done a massive study of households in the UK to understand how they can help people live more sustainably at home. P&G today is mimicking a lot of these startups, as a lot of other brands are doing these days, with sort of like startup incubators. So instead of having this 3, 4, 5 years uh, R&D phases, they do them quick. They do sprints. They create something fast. They put it out there. They test it. Um, so I think we as an industry need to um, we need to deal with a lot of new thinking, and as I said, that makes it probably the most exciting time to live in marketing, but it also makes it one of the most difficult, because what is it really that you want? And and I think that's why specialization today in marketing is so crucial. That you go, who needs the kind of full advertising shop? I mean, you rather want to have the best specialist reach out to the best specialist on a certain topic and get that advice than you want to go to the full service agency, because they're not able to kind of cover every need from A to Z. They're not. And yet again, the most disappointing about all this stuff we talk about is that the more we know that we need to en masse and on market marketing, we go in the opposite direction. Because what am I seeing? I'm seeing automation. I'm seeing marketing departments being cut down now during the pandemic, so fewer people. And the worst thing about I absolutely hate all this idea about automation because it's honestly it goes contrary to what I talk about. I mean, think about it. If you on your anniversary or on your whatever year day with a girlfriend or boyfriend, send them an automated anniversary message. Hey wife, I love you, and it's automated. It doesn't really show a lot of effort, and I think that's what you feel when you get these targeted, retargeted messages. You just know that it's marketing. It just smells of marketing. I mean, the only thing that's just slightly changed is that maybe they got my name right. Sometimes they don't. So we need. I think we need to adapt new tricks and tools.
I won't even use the word tricks. I think you need to be more authentic,
Yeah,
and you need to build soulful automation.
yeah.
Let me put it that way, right?
No,
Because
but it's a very good way of saying it. Yeah, soulful automation. Or, yeah, authenticity.
yeah,
Exactly.
so therefore, if you build soulful automation, then you bring in the capability of technology, but you build the emotion, okay,
Yeah.
into the automation, then you build scale. I think the ability of the technology guys to think creatively and the creative guys to think technology process is really, I think, the way I see the future, and I see some ideas that you seem to be talking about really taking shape. But tell me, the sustainability seems to be more wannabe kind of campaigns, right? I saved the ocean, and I saved the nature, and I just look at it and then I just say, here is one humbug campaign that's there. So is sustainability having a storytelling problem?
I definitely think so. I completely agree. So, and I think that's naming a book like naming a child is never easy, and that was exactly why I wanted to call the new book The Hero Trap. Also to warn people that it was something that was fundamentally different than my first book, Goodvertising, because in some aspects I think I had a naive way of looking at purpose. I had a naive way of building brands for good. Because again, as I jokingly said before, and I actually mean this, I mean, if you go into the supermarket and you look at the shelves, I mean, how many, Gandhis, Jesuses, Mother Teresa's can you have? I mean, I I might know in my life, I might know, and I know a lot of really passionate change makers, but a handful, two handful, three handfuls of people max that really truly does something. And I think that's the real danger, that when you put on that hero cape as a brand, I mean, you're going to fall down as a can of soup because it's not trustworthy. I mean, I'm not a hero. I fail on a daily basis to live up to some of the most basic things. I mean, when I travel, I love flying in business class, and it's not good for the environment. I know it, and I fail. I do lots of things that are not good. I do. I think all of us do. The danger is when you build brands that seems to be perfect, that seems to be saints, they're going to fail. Obviously, they're going to fail. And so I don't think that people really want brands that are saints. But I think what I portray in the book is, in fact, uh, people want brands like they want friends that understand them and they want to help them on their journey towards wherever they might be. Maybe it's a friend that want to go there for a fun time. That's the friend you call when you have technical issues. The friend you call uh, when when um, when you want to learn to live a little bit more planet friendly or whatever it might be. I think those are the sort of changes that's happening. Um, yeah. So sustainability for me is definitely facing a storytelling problem, and secondly, it's also really faced with a we acting too slow problem. We're acting way too slow. Big brands are these big oil tankers, and they're really really slow at changing course. And that's a danger because just behind them, there are tons of challenges brands waiting to pick up, to eat chunks away of their market shares. And as you see right now with acquisitions and stuff like that, a lot of these big FMG companies buying up brands all the time. Unilever, P&G buy up all of these challenger brands because they know it's a crucial part of their future proofing of their portfolios. Um, so so it's kind of key to understand that that change needs to happen, and that's actually another beef of mine. you know, I see. I only mention this because it's a classic hero trap again. You know, all these corporates that go out and then they say, you know, in 2030, 2040, 2050, we're going to do this XYZ. You know, and I mean, what a nonsense. I mean, in essence, if you think about it, let's say after we've done this podcast recording, I come home and I take my girlfriend being unfaithful. I'm like, what are you doing? And she looks at me and she's like, yeah, Thomas, sorry about that. You know, I'm seeing this other guy, but you know what? I'm going to promise you that each day towards 2030, I'm going to be a little bit less unfaithful until 2030, we're back together. And basically that's what these big brands are asking of me, right? It's ludicrous because it's like again, they don't recognize that I have a choice. Do I need to wait for brand XYZ to change their course? I have tons of other options. And I think especially now, the speed of these things are going to pick up because of the pandemic, because I think people realize that, wait a moment, I actually do like online shopping. It's actually easy. I have a much bigger scope of things I can choose from rather than going into the big old brick and mortar stores where somebody's taking the choices for me. I think it really does show this fundamental shift that needs to happen is in fact that the people in marketing don't understand the people and the planet sustainability, and it clashes all the time. I wish those two departments could come more fully together, or even better, just don't have those departments. Just don't. But in fact, those two worlds operate on a completely different set of rules. So in the world of sustainability, you want everything to be measurable. You want it to be very rational. Um, you want you want things to, not that you want things to be complex, but the world is complex. The world of sustainability is incredibly complex. You can't just say a plastic bag is bad and this reusable cotton bag is good, because in fact you need to use the reusable cotton bag, I don't know how many times. I think it's like 300 times before it's actually better than the plastic bag. So can't just put it up like that. So the world is extremely complex in the world of sustainability. But the planet marketing works under almost the opposite way, operate under almost the opposite rules, in the sense that if you want to be successful in marketing, it needs to be emotional, it needs to be simple, and it needs to be actionable. So, so obviously, when you kind of have these two worlds coming together, it clash all the time, because sometimes you simplify a key sustainability message too much. Sometimes you rationalize a sustainability message too much, so it becomes boring and completely uninvolving. Like when you have, that's my beef, right? When you see these brands kind of showing you the carbon emissions of a product, I'm like, what the hell do I know? I mean, like 25 kilos per, I don't even know what it is. I mean, come on, help me out. What is that? So you're putting out something that's rational, that's scientific, and all that stuff. But I just don't get it. It doesn't work in the world of marketing. So those are some of the dilemmas that I tend to work on with companies, and trying to get them to understand how we find the middle way, how we understand doing these hero traps again and again, and and um, and usually it's quite fun, playful conversations that that comes out of these sessions.
So clearly, Thomas, one of the things that I see is, if you go back to the 1830s, you had commodity. Therefore, people had distrust with the quality that they were getting. So brands got made, right? So therefore, it's almost like a easy easy to pick up because I know this brand is trustworthy. So therefore, commodity became brands,
Yeah.
right? And therefore, then quality just got ingrained into those brands. I think now with the 2030s coming in, brands have become commodities, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, the fact that you have to now add a new layer of marketing or a new layer of uh, a promise to brands is very critical, and it's the faster we do it, the better it is. And do you believe this area of being authentic, being appealing to me as a person, unmasking the marketing, or me being the mass marketing idea, is that something that is going to be very critical to how you really envelop this brand becoming commodities? Because now I know every brand is the quality is the same. Okay, so therefore I really don't care today. Therefore you have private label brands,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
therefore I think the 1830s to the 2030s, if you see, there's a big shift, and but the marketing has not changed, right? And
Yeah.
therefore I think that's the big shift that you are talking about, and I believe that it requires new framework, new codes, new methods of doing it. And I just don't see the frameworks being there for that. Would you agree with me on that?
Absolutely, Swami. I think the development I try and portray in the book um, is really from kind of the functional benefits, the emotional benefits, to sort of brands being built around societal benefits, like when I talked about it in the book Goodvertising. So you try to promote the company on its higher societal effort or its purpose, to really being about the transformative benefits that we're really kind of getting closer to what I would call a transformation economy. Uh, and 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 why that is in fact that what brands are claiming doesn't really carry a lot of weight in itself anymore, because everybody is just screaming everything from every rooftop. As you say, brands are in essence being commoditized. Then there's all this talk about story doing or actions, etc. And yes, that is true. You can come home to your wife and you can give her red roses, and that's an action. But by the end of the day, the real key to change is in fact when I can feel it on my own body, that this brand have helped me do things differently. It made me smarter. It made me more connected. It made me greener. It made me healthier. That's essentially what I'm buying. And that's why I do believe in transformative brands. And when I asked the question earlier, what brand, organization, and leader have in fact changed your life positively? One of the brands that changed my life was in fact a Danish brand called Årstiderne, which means seasons in Danish. And basically, what they do, they deliver to my doorstep a box of farm fresh produce, but it also comes with recipes. And one of the things I wanted to understand better was how to cook. I love cooking, but how to cook better vegetarian, vegan food. I mean, remember, I'm not lucky coming from a country like India, where you have tons of delicious plant based dishes. I mean, my what I grew up with was like pork meat, overboiled potatoes, fat gravy. That's what I was served, meatballs, stuff like that. So for me to have a brand that helped me on that journey towards embracing plant-based cooking is something that I'm obviously incredibly grateful for. And the interesting thing in the book, when we did some research and compared these different strategies, so for example, purposeful campaigns versus transformative campaigns, so campaigns that take we're the agents of change, we're going to change the world, compared to you're the agent of change, you can change the world mindset. It was interesting to see that people were on average 29.4% more motivated by the transformational campaigns, and people were were on average 29.6% more willing to pay a premium price. And for me, that's the key in branding, right? You build a meaningful relationship. And also going back to that point we raised in the beginning, this gap between intent and action. The 29%, we're almost there by having brands that support our journey, that's there saying, Swami, we believe in you. If you wanna, if you wanna go on that run, we're the company that got your back. And Nike is actually, in fact, even though they sometimes fail, but in essence, Nike is also an example of a transformative brand, and have done amazing things like Nike Plus, like Fuel Band, to keep you on your tracks, to keep you motivated, to keep your keep or help you move further and faster, right? And I think that's the key today in marketing is really to understand that we're heading towards this kind of transformation economy, which will resonate across everything from, again, the marketing you do, the marketing mix, your retail spaces, your internal organization. All these things, I believe, have to change in the near future.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. Here are some closing questions that I have for you. What are some of your favorite books?
Oh, you know what? I jokingly mentioned this example earlier from Blinkist about not having time to read. it's, it's, it's absolutely shocking. My night table is like packed with books from peers that I love in this business, and I'm just so behind at the moment. It's astonishing, but yeah. I'll have a hard time right now to pick one out. Sorry about that. But in general, I love books about change. I love books about nudging. I love books about understanding human psychology better. Those are some of the books that you'll definitely find on my night table.
What would be the three pieces of advice you would give to your younger self?
Um, Definitely, I have a couple there. I think be generous. I think in the beginning, as a young creative, you you, and I think the advertising industry is to blame for this, but because you grow up and you're like, oh, my idea is fantastic. I'm not going to share it with anybody. This is mine. Almost like a bad scene from Lord of the Rings with my precious, right? This is my idea. Nobody's going to touch it. And so for me, I wish I'd been more generous with that, because when you're generous, you get so much back, feedback that makes your ideas much better. So I think generosity was probably one of the things that I should have embraced even more. Stubbornness. I'm really, really stubborn. It's it's sometimes a good thing because obviously it's produced a couple of books and lots of other things. But I think sometimes you also need to recognize when when you're too stubborn, and when you're young, that's harder sometimes to recognize. And the third thing, and I think this is something that I think all of us deal with throughout life, is really to follow your passion. And it sounds easy, but it really never is. I felt that little light bulb moment I had around the age of 30. For some people, that happens at an age of 50. Sometimes people are lucky and get it at the age of 12. But this idea that you really kind of align yourself with the things that make you tick is just incredibly important, because especially in our industry, that is a tough industry to work in, that's stressful, that costs people a lot. People sacrifice a lot to work in our industry. And so I think if you forget the passion sometimes, we see burnouts, we see stress. So I think that's a key thing that even back then I should have been better at embracing. But a good question always. See, that's exactly why I love those types of books, because they make you think. It's always good. Human psychology is interesting.
If you were to invite four guests for a dream dinner,
Who would they be and why?
I think one guy that definitely would be there is Nelson Mandela, and I normally I don't have a lot of heroes, but I think this guy in so many aspects was such a healer and bridge builder, and I think especially today we need more bridge builders in such a divisive, toxic environment across the world. In fact. So I think Nelson Mandela would be good to bring to the dinner table, definitely. Um, who else would I have at that dinner table? I would definitely need someone fun who could light up the mood. Not to say that Nelson Mandela wasn't funny. Uh, I'd probably, so this is probably a bit of an oddball, but I would probably invite a comedian called Bill Burr. He's an American U.S. comedian, but he's just a very no BS kind of guy, and he makes it funny because he shows how he's vulnerable. He's very open about some of his flaws, and for me at least, that's great comedy. And I'd be excited to see how Nelson Mandela and Bill Burr would get along. Don't think they ever met each other. Uh,
Great.
um, a third one, I probably would invite. I probably would invite a business person. At the moment, I'm quite split in terms of whom I'm actually looking up to. But yeah, one guy I probably would invite is so that's an open invitation to you, is Emmanuel Faber's, the ex-CEO of Danone, because I thought that you know he he tried, he tried to take this French FMCG and push it towards purpose, turn it into a B Corp. And I would love to have a conversation with him about some of those challenges and obviously why he got ousted and all that stuff. So he could probably be an interesting guy to throw into the mix. And then lastly, I mean, I probably would invite Dave Hackens just because David, this young Dutch designer, just to make it a mixed bag of people. He's fun to hang around with. He always got exciting projects going for him. One of the other projects he's doing right now is called Precious Plastics, where he builds these do-it-yourself machines that can crunch a plastic into small granulates, and then you can create amazing products out of it. That's just up to your own imagination what you want to create. So those would probably be my four four dinner guests. And obviously, Swami, we would have to bring you into the mix somehow. So let's let's have an honorary guest at the end of the table. So
Great,
yeah.
great, great. Thanks for inviting me. That's quite, I would say, it's a privilege to be there. Let's see. What does the word successful mean to you?
For me, it's I define success probably quite differently from most people. I did actually have the other day a conversation with a couple of my friends about it. I think for me, success is being able to align your work life with your private life and your passions. I think way too often, and I think this again is probably a good advice to my younger self. I think way too often you get captivated by things like money and status, and you run faster and you get blinded by some of these things, rather than actually understanding that the most privileged thing you can have in life is balance. It's not too much, it's not too little. I mean, in Swedish they have a word for that which is called lagom, which means just enough. uh, in I know
So,
in
what is it called? What is it called?
Lagom, Lagom.
Okay.
I know that in Thailand they have this thing that they call sufficiency economy that was taught by the old Thai king, and which is sort of the same thing. That let's not go crazy in the one direction or the other direction. And I think, in fact, when I look at my life right now, I feel I have the world's best job because I still have time to create passion projects. I still have I'm fortunate to be used to be able to travel around the world and meet and tons of inspiring people and having conversations with people like you. I think that's privileged, and that's what I define as a success.
Great. What are the 3 or 4 pieces of advice you would give to a 18-year-old studying in a university now?
um, Drop out. Uh, no, yeah, you know, I shouldn't say that, because in fact, my both my parents have been in the educational space for through my life, and in some ways, I'm in the educational space as well. Be critical. I think that's the primary thing. I think that's the primary thing any good institution today needs to teach young people is critical thinking. I think that's question everything, question what you learn, how you learn it. That's incredibly important. The second thing is, and I know that you know um, I know that a lot of young people obviously have a lot of confidence, but I think confidence is really key. Um, and really aiming for what it is that you want. I mean, a really good example early on in my career was when I did research to my first book, Goodvertising, and again at the time I was probably 29, 28, no 29. I was 29 at the time, and I remember I asked this really esteemed creative colleague of mine that I had a lot of respect for, and I told him about the book that I wanted to write and why I wanted to write it. And he looked at me with those kind of that critical glance, like, what makes you capable of doing that, and what's your work experience that can at all, rectify that. And I just looked him in his eyes and I said, because I'm doing it. And he kind of shook his head and walked off. And so I think that's probably a second thing for an 18-year-old student to understand, that just have that tenacity and go get him mindset. And the last thing would for me um, probably be empathy, because I think there's just in general a lack of empathy, of understanding differences, understanding culture, understanding those who aren't like us. And I think if you want to survive in the world of business going forward, in a global business world that's becoming more and more intertwined, I think you need to have that as a key factor. You need to be empathetic towards the people that you meet, and curious about the way they live, and understanding of their situation.
Great. What is something you believe that nobody else agrees with you on?
good, good question. uh, what um, what would that be? I'm just trying to think what are the most nagging I get from my girlfriend at the moment. I'm just trying to think about that. What do I, besides obviously the kind of toilet seat thing? I get a lot of nagging from that. I would probably claim that I'm good at it, and she's still nagging me about it. But that's almost too small a thing. Um, there's one thing that, I mean, I don't know if anybody would, but I'm I'm really not into brand activism. I know that everybody is like applauding, Nike and all these guys and Patagonia when they go out and they're like, put this little label in the jerseys that says "Vote the assholes out," of it, as in a reference to Trump when he was still in that administration, and things like that. So when brands go Nike, whether like believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, I think that's the sort of rhetoric that's almost kind of running high speed into the hero trap, and it's the sort of rhetoric that's creating a more separated, a more disenfranchised, a more dysfunctional society, because it's pitching us against them. Climate believers against people who don't believe, people who believe in diversity and people who don't. And I think the ones who have the ones who are on the high road and who gets these things, if you're good at math, you don't tease the people, tease the people, or provoke the people who are bad at math. And I think that's why I don't like brand activism. So that could probably be one thing, besides the toilet seat. I'm good at putting the toilet seat down. I hope I'll send her this podcast afterwards just to kind of name and shame her on this.
So the final question is, what's the best piece of advice anyone has ever given you?
I think this goes back all the way to secondary school, and I had this math teacher, very traditional school teacher. Remember, I grew up in a Danish school system, and back then you weren't allowed at all to hit the children or anything, and he was still the guy who would maybe like do a little thing or two. But I remember I might have been not always the best student in class. I was good in school, but I was easily bored. So sometimes I got into trouble. And I remember, I remember he one day took me out of class and we walked down to the library, and he put me in this stool, and I was sitting there for quite some time while he walked around the library, picked up a dictionary, and he sat in front of me, and I was terrified. I was like, he's going to kill me now. He's going to hit me. I don't know what's going to happen. And he sat like flipping the pages, and he found this word, which is Danish, which is distanceblænder. And the word really, and I never heard the word even in Danish, and really what it means is somebody who gets blinded by the short term, who only runs the short mile, who doesn't take the marathon. And for me, it's really something that I think he spotted very early on. And I think a lot of creatives deal with this thing that we always want to move on to the next project. I often have a very hard time saying no, so I want to be engaged in lots of different things. And so in that way, he quite early on actually really kind of gave me a label that I have then thought about and tried to work on through a lot of those years. Unfortunately, I don't think that he's alive anymore. I tried to find him a couple of years back because I wanted to actually give him a call and say thank you for being so precise about understanding some of my challenges.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was absolutely brilliant. Your thoughts on how we need to do unmarketing for brands, how the consumer behavior today is changing with the young people who are around, was really fantastic. And thanks a lot for your time. Thanks again for being a guest in my podcast.
Thank you, Swami, and really big thank you to you, because I think without people like you who help spread this message, I don't think we're going to be successful. So I'm really happy that you lent a bit of airtime to this message, and thank you to all the listeners for listening in on this. And do remember, all of you, to be the change that you want to see out there.
Thanks for listening to this episode. For selected links and detailed show notes, visit www.contraminds.com/blog. Follow ContraMinds on social media and let us know who you would like to see next on the podcast. If you're listening to ContraMinds on Apple Podcasts, do share your comments and give us a rating. We are keen to know what you're thinking. ContraMinds is also on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and stay up to date on all our releases. Thanks for listening and stay safe.